just real quick. I was just, I had some that was like, that was interesting but hard to follow. Others were like, um, but just any thoughts about that, particularly, what Peter was talking about. If there are none, that's fine. We can just move on to chapter 3. Okay. Well, I don't know. I'm gonna chapter 3 lends heavily toward some of the practices being put into place that Benedict talked to. He addresses um, uh, in the rule of living, the rule for living, and it's basically broken down into some categories: it's order, prayer, work, asceticism, stability, community, hospitality, and balance. And this I feel like this is another chapter, much like chapter 2, that is he's trying to cover a lot. He's in one chapter. I also feel like that's the majority of the book. Each chapter is filled with a lot of scholarship, a lot of ideas, and this one is the same. Uh, but I mean, the first thing that he sort of lays out with with these brethren, with these people. I guess somebody's trying to get in. Is that when they use the word order, the word, hey, I know you're coming in here.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy.
What's up?
Have a seat. Welcome, Zach, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Morning.
Is that the order that they're talking about is not necessarily the order of, if you read Benedict's manual, he requires a certain amount of clothing when they're in bed. But it's reflecting the created order that's already inherent in the cosmos. And like Peter said last week, they were students of in this inherent created order. They weren't masters of it, and so that's what Benedictine Dreher is trying to address here. Any thoughts on that piece there? The first kind of bullet of order.
Yeah, I think one thing that really stuck out to me, and this was evident in chapter 2 also, but it's just when you accommodate a divine relationship between, God and every single thing that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, that's, for me personally, probably where it makes a lot of change, right? Because we get so busy, we get so caught up in thinking that we are the ones who are influencing the outcome of any given situation on a day-to-day basis, when in reality it's like the fundamental view of how God's influence and just interaction is evident.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It also brings this depth of, I quote, like spirituality, or this connectivity to God, even in the most practical things. I mean, because you're sort of looking for God in everything, which I appreciate.
Sort of looking at it, he didn't discuss any specifics in this chapter of the way in which our society, rejects that sort of orientation of orderliness, and seeing order driven by, how our created world is, is God's creation, and therefore manifests His fingerprints in all kinds of ways, and that God has a particular order for us that He wants us to live in. But I mean, I just as I was reading, it just hit me just with all kinds of different ways in which that's true. I mean, the big one that occurs to me, probably just because, I mean, it's one little slice, but it's so hot right now in our society, is just thinking about um, about humans as sexual beings. I mean,
Right.
the 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 most obvious way in which society now says, okay, here's this thing, it's sex, and I'm going to give the meaning to it that I want to give to it,
Right.
and totally disassociating from sex and sexuality, that it has a deeply you know a meaning, a purpose that that no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to avoid certain effects. I mean, you could try to give it the meaning you want as much as you want, but I mean, you're only going to have limited success. And the more you try to butt your head up against that, the worse off you're going to become.
Right.
You're better off, trying to live in accordance with it, in accordance with that sort of that natural order.
Right. Yeah, I didn't fully grasp. I mean, I got that piece, particularly with, sex. Um, I got it to a degree, but I didn't fully grasp it or see it until I saw Erin give birth. And then I saw after that how her body, how she used her body for our children. And I would if you don't look at that piece and see it as one of the primary reasons, then you're losing the understanding of what it means, But our culture does it all the time, all the time.
Well, I think our culture takes it from a standpoint of like procreating. That's what we're meant to do, is procreate. Or in a sense of like, if you're taking it from an evolution standpoint too, is that, we're animals, we're here, and we're meant to procreate. So, and that's just from a simpler standpoint of the way that they view it, or in a way of just being able to just look at it.
Right.
This is what we want.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I also think we put inherent, like we talked about last week, we put value on that sort of relationship, or look for the intrinsic meaning, what we bring to it. It's like, I'm just hooking up right now, and that's all that this means. Brian, you've been quiet recently. You don't need to be quiet any longer.
Ruminating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this discussion is really helpful, I think. And I see the overriding theme is, what's interesting, I think, is that big picture, I see a glorification of classical Western thought. But the same classical Western thought, when it was rediscovered in the Enlightenment or the Renaissance, and then ultimately works out in Enlightenment, leads to an individualism that is independent of God's authority. And it's an evolution. It goes through a process where John Locke identifies somewhat of a deist God that establishes the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. But I think the path is set in motion where ultimately, in the mid-1800s, between social Darwinism, where we apply Darwinism to society, and the rise of Marxism, which denies the existence of God and replaces it with the state, we're on the path to the autonomy of the individual,
right,
which is most directly manifest now, I think, in a complete separation of sexuality from really any higher authority, even if that's Darwinism. There's a certain arrogance to think that human beings will continue to thrive if they deny that there are any kind of natural laws which govern the universe. It's almost as if we can thwart natural law and we'll still be almost conquer it. We become the natural law. That's what I've been ruminating on.
Well, I mean, and I also think that's exactly right. In that, like, he says it right out the beginning, especially with order, and defining the characteristic of the modern world is disorder, which disorder, I think what he's talking about is that there is actual no order because we all bring our own thoughts, we all bring our own truth, we all bring our own ideas, and then that truth is mine, and so nobody can say anything against it. So that's, I think, the idea of disorder. He said the most, fundamental act that we can do is reestablish or recapture the inherent created order that's there of like 6 days work, 1 day rest, and these other things that is just a part of our DNA that we literally can't undo it. We can try, but along the way we'll destroy ourselves.
It's interesting. There's no basis in a postmodern world for judgment.
Right.
I mean, for determining right and wrong.
Right.
So everything has value.
Right.
I proclaim it to have value.
Right.
And we're going to see that break down in societies.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's coming out. It's like crazy already. So
As you said that, Brian, what image that popped into my head was the hours that I've spent walking through modern art museums.
Yeah. That's funny. That's right.
Exactly.
At the auction, I'll pay $2 million for it. I just has value.
Yeah. I mean, seriously. Right. I'm just kind of curious. For those of us that like are reading through this, maybe for the first time, is there any paradigm changes going on? Is there any sort of shifts in your minds of I'm kind of seeing this a little bit more clearly. Anything like that?
The rhetoric in chapter 1 was very aggressive, and since then it's definitely backed off. If you would have asked me, having read where I have now, it would have been more along the lines of, if you had asked me that in chapter 1, I would have thought I would have needed to go live with the Benedictine monks to actually be able to apply the logic that he talked about in chapter 1. However, I think it's much more applicable given specifically in chapter 3, and I think there's some good direction there, and I look forward to chapter 4 as well.
I really love this discussion of authority that's emerging. Page 44, let's go back a little bit. He says, what is it? Following your own heart, no matter what society says or the church or anybody else. This kind of thinking is devastating to every kind of social stability, but especially to the church community that authoritatively teaches and disciples its members cannot withstand a revolution in which each member becomes, in effect, his own pope.
Yeah.
And then that, though, juxtaposed with this statement right here, and this is in balance. This is in rules, rule for living. So jumping ahead to the chapter we're in, this orientation toward community life stands in stark contrast to a number of other Christian intentional communities that have fallen apart or become cult-like because an authoritarian leader obsessed with purity abused power. So it's an interesting tension about how authority plays out in the life of the community.
Right. And then it can be abused and
yeah.
So
and he provides nice criteria for how to judge that right in the next paragraph.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. What are you gonna say?
There are some things that seem cult-like to me. I mean, it just did the way the months, and I'm not as well studied as y'all are.
Sure.
But I was just like, wow. I mean, what you said about them dressing in their bed had to be made a certain way. And
yeah.
Wait, this is like the military.
Yeah, that's like that's brainwashing right there. Yeah.
So there's a fine line.
Sure.
The individualism that everybody that we're talking about, and then the following. But when these things about prayer and work and whatever, I mean, that's a lot of things. Those are good things.
Yeah.
I mean, to bring your prayer life into the work and whatever. So,
Right.
but it was a little bit scary on that, and I guess that is an individualism in each of us coming out. You say that. So.
Well, it was a voluntary thing. The monks that kind of submitted themselves, and it was it did require a certain amount. But I think what Benedict ultimately was kind of picking up on is that there is a sense in which we all do respond in sort of a good way, in a way that causes flourishing, to have a specific sort of order in our life that brings out disciplines, and
There
brings out
needs to
good
be an
things.
absolute truth. I mean,
Sure.
is
Yeah.
is truth, and when it starts becoming what's good to me, then
Right.
then the disorder comes.
Right.
Because,
It's like once you do something, there's an order, there's a product out of it.
Especially when you're responding to the created order.
Yeah.
I really like what they had to say, especially in prayer and work. And we're not going to have the time to talk about each and every single one of these. But is out of prayer, work, order, asceticism, stability, community, hospitality. Did any of those sort of bullets, sections within the chapter stick out to you guys that you might want to talk about? And just remember where we're heading. Like we're going through this book in order to give us some understanding, but at the end of this, we're going to create a sort of together a rule for us, to follow in some way. Not one as strict as what we've had in the past, or what I even had in New York, but some that we can all follow. So that's sort of where we're heading. But any of these bullets stick out to you guys?
Yeah, I think you combine two of them here, Ryan. I was thinking, you got the discipline or the asceticism and the community, right? So one is the rule or the discipline for doing things a certain way, and then the community serves as a function to be, accountability, right? So I think a huge part of this moving forward and how we apply it is going to be related to how we can hold each other accountable for certain things. And probably not as legalistic as the Benedictine monks, but for us to absolutely get everything out of this that we possibly can, I think accountability has to be huge.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. Like there's the rule of life that we had in New York, we called certain friendships confessors, and that's what they were. That we would talk to one another, and they would know exactly. I mean, Peter and I have operated as that for each other for years. So, yeah.
But I will say, Nate has about another month of not showing up to church, or he's got to lay in front of the congregation until he's accepted that.
Until the abbot is satisfied.
Is that accountability coming out already? Yeah. So,
I thought the asceticism, I'm just going to ignore that remark. I thought the asceticism section, it really just, it probably, in my mind, captures the most about monastic life that strikes me as misguided. And I mean, there's an important way in which, I think it's plausible that people might sort of live their entire lives in a sort of symbolic fashion. And I'm up in the air about whether anyone ought to do that. But putting that aside, I mean, I just read it and see just how much the monks intentionally deprive themselves of the creation that God, created for us, and wonder whether that's a good or a bad thing. I mean, like they restrict themselves to only eating, 2 dishes at a meal, which I guess is better than 1 dish. And I guess it's better than saying you can only eat 1 dish and it has to be the same dish every time.
Yeah.
I suppose you could go that far, but I mean, like, yes, it's a useful, like it's a tool which could, help you psychologically recognize that um, your desire to eat and eat perhaps too much food or too much different food could distract you from God. But I mean, it just doesn't really strike me like that's the way God, wants us to experience the bounty of what He created for us. And I mean, perhaps seasons of things like that might be appropriate, but it seems over the top to me.
I mean, I feel like, and maybe Brian or Peter can chime in, but this is a very, because of asceticism and how it's been handled in the past. Sometimes this is I think it's a common reaction. I mean, in my pastor, actually, Peter and I's pastor was here on Sunday. Jeff Myers was in the house yesterday, Dr. Jeff, and I remember some of his sermons of, talking about asceticism in these most extreme cases where, saints that would have, or, priests that would have impure thoughts would throw themselves in thorn bushes, and, and they would do a lot of seemingly kind of outlandish things. When I think of those asceticism, especially in this, I think about temperance and self-control, and more of just fruits of the like more language that's in fruits of the spirit. Like, yeah, I mean, I think there are moments of feasting and enjoying, but like anything too much, even good, is too much, and it turns into something negative. And I think that also kind of picks up on the balance piece. Am I? Yeah, no, maybe.
Well, this may be a good question, but how is that different than the Pharisees did?
Zach, speak up.
He said
Good
how.
question.
Yeah, it's good. And he said, how is this idea of asceticism different than what the Pharisees did? Now, maybe I don't know if I'm qualified to answer. I don't know that the posture at the beginning of a Pharisee is necessarily wrong. Like, their desire was to respond to God and to love God, but along the way,
It's like a product of doing that. Which, I mean, in a sense, that can happen with really anything.
sure.
Like, part of like what I'm thinking is that we have a desire and a drive to constantly fill ourselves, which, I mean, like you said, that's where sometimes balance comes in and stuff like that. But I mean, the ultimate thing is like all the time, like I feel like you're constantly battling with your desire yourself to do it for self, gratification, and then not only that, for self praise. But I mean, I feel like in a way it's kind of like what the Pharisees put up in front was like, if we're going to get too close to this, we got to make sure that we put 5 or 6 things before it.
Sure.
Just to make sure that we don't get hurt.
Sure. All right. Any thoughts there?
Maybe the Pharisees had a healthier fear of the wages of sin and death. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't.
wages of sin and death.
Well, the thing is, I don't think that the posture at the beginning, like, I mean, anybody that says I want to follow God and respond to Him and have, or respect the law and live according to it, I don't think it's a wrong or evil thing. It's just along the way, like many things do, it became, sort of, corrupted, I guess. I don't know, Peter, you got any thoughts there, brother?
Yeah, I mean, I can, coming from a theological tradition that is a little bit more, I guess, friendly is the term I'm looking for, to the ascetic tradition. I'm just, in my mind, I fly back to some of the language that St. Paul uses in the epistles to describe healthy Christian asceticism. Um, I keep my body under submission, he says, like he's training it. He uses terms from Greek athletics to talk about what he's trying to do, right? He doesn't fight his one uncertainly. And, there's kind of a new secular asceticism afoot if we look out in the modern culture today. You've got all sorts of dietary movements and physical training movements that guys are doing, and none of us, I don't think too many of us, looks askance at a person who says, for my own personal health, I'm going to watch what I eat. I'm going to watch it very carefully. I'm going to hold myself to a rigorous physical exercise regimen, right? These things are health choices. In the ancient Christian vows of baptism, oftentimes the Christian would be explicitly addressed in terms of spiritual warfare and told that the vows that they were taking enjoined them to struggle against the temptations of the world, the flesh, and the devil. While we want to affirm that at the base of Christian philosophy is an understanding that the world is a gift of God, that it is a good thing, that he gave it to man. Nevertheless, sin has entered the equation, and the world can be a source of temptation. And as creatures of body and soul, it's reasonable that we should develop some sort of discipline. That is, we should make sure that the world is in its proper place, right? And to the monks of the Benedictine tradition, did the medieval monks go a little overboard in their asceticism? Perhaps, but it was because they really did believe that this was a form of spiritual warfare. They looked to the example of our Lord as he was preparing for his ministry after his baptism. He goes out into the wilderness and deprives himself of much good in order to grow closer to God and eventually to do this kind of face-to-face combat with Satan. And I think they were attempting to replicate that somehow in their own lives by practicing rigorous disciplines. There's a need for balance there. But I think it's probably healthy for every Christian in one way or another for a period, if not constantly, to periodically assert the primacy of the soul over and against the needs of the body. So that would be all I would throw out.
I never thought of CrossFit as a, because I don't like CrossFit and I don't like CrossFit people, but but I never thought CrossFit as a like honestly a cultural, social, very much more accepted sect of asceticism.
I've actually read articles recently that talk about how religion has fallen away among young people, the rise of the nuns, so to speak. Nuns isn't. I don't identify with any particular tradition that make the contention that CrossFit is kind of like a substitute religion for a number of people.
Oh yeah, would agree. So I don't trust anybody doing it. I'm just kidding. That's my own weirdness coming up. Okay. I feel like we could probably give another hour to this chapter, but yeah, I just want to highlight. I appreciate all of you coming along on this journey with us, and this is something that is still very much to be discovered. I feel like we have the right posture. I feel like a lot of us are sort of fed up with things that we've been given or cultural moment that we're in. And so we are open to looking for, what is that all about? Another device. We're looking for answers and we're looking for things. And so I appreciate that. I was talking with a friend yesterday and said, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. So, but any final thoughts? I mean, we've still got about 15 minutes, but I mean, I feel like this one of the ones that has challenged me the most it wasn't community, hospitality, balance, order, asceticism, work, or prayer. It was stability. And this idea that they had is staying in one place essentially and remaining there. That you didn't really leave. You didn't move on unless there was this collective amongst your brothers that say, yeah, we feel like this is what God is calling you to do. And that just kicks against this, I can do what I want when I want and go where I want. And it really doesn't affect the people that I'm living life with and doing life with. Like I've just moved. I got a new job and it's a better job and I can find a church where I'm at, or I can find another community. That's the one that really pushes against me the most. I don't know about anyone else.
I really appreciated that because I think culturally, especially in the professional world, we define risk as like going and doing a new thing, right? Like I'm gonna take a risk and I'm gonna go take this new job, take a risk and I'm gonna go do whatever. When the real risk is sitting still,
Remaining.
remaining. And again, I think you're right. That really bucks against our culture, like this idea of commitment. And that's ultimately what we're talking about. Being committed.
Yeah.
All those things you can kind of they bubble back to commitment. But this idea of just sitting still and being committed and being just okay with where God has placed you, that is a risk because it's just culturally not acceptable. Like it's not acceptable just to commit yourself to something for the long haul. And I know that culturally that's changed. I mean, you look at my parents and my grandparents. I mean, they were committed to a career at the same place for 30, 40 years.
Yeah. It used to be there.
They used to.
Yeah.
But now we just can't do that. We just, we can't commit ourselves to really anything for over 3 or 4 years.
I had an opportunity in the company I'm in now. After a couple of years being there, they wanted me to go be a vice president.
You're probably gonna have to speak up a little bit.
They wanted me to be a vice president in Florida, and my kids were in the middle of their high school years. It meant a lot more money to me, and I thought about it. I mean, I was like, man, it'd be nice, to look at that kind of money. But at the end of the day, I thought what's good for them, and I'm going to be displacing them, and I've got roots here in the area.
Right.
I like the area, and at the end of the day, I thought, what's the end of the game? I'm doing good work here. I had a youth group I was leading. I had a lot of things going on, and my kids were rooted here. And it's like, maybe that was asceticism. I don't know that I denied myself all the riches, and the people I work with couldn't believe that I
turned it down.
But they were okay with it. I mean,
Yeah.
they knew I did it, more for my family, and not selfishly, I did it for me because I thought, the stability part meant a lot to me. Community means a lot to me. Being somewhere.
I really appreciate the anecdote you told about his sister. I think it's a beautiful picture. I saw that when my grandfather died. My grandfather never left the town. He grew up in, both of his kids, my dad and my uncle, they all left. Small town in North Carolina. But my grandfather committed his life to that town, the communities he was involved in. And when he passed, it was much like the same. I mean, it was like a homecoming. You know, like the whole community comes out and celebrating the life of a pretty simple man. Like, I don't think he really, didn't really accomplish anything in his life that was worth, telling the world about. But to see the community come out and celebrate, his life, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I think you saw that in the story of his sister. Like, what a horrible situation. But because she was committed to a community and to people, her life was celebrated. I think it's something we lose heart of. We don't find importance in those things today.
Well, and the more you jump around, I feel like the people that I've seen that have jumped around a whole lot, they've become more isolated in some sense.
You lose trust.
Yeah, it's just
gain trust every single time that you jump.
yeah.
I also think it affects the way we think about friends, because we're constantly moving around, and so you think about friends as something that's voluntary, we choose, instead of thinking about it in a more like committed, communal, covenanted sort of nature, that it's not just you're my friend because I picked you, and you're my friend because God placed you here in my life.
It's a consumeristic,
sure,
you're just consuming benefits.
Right.
And I think it goes back to the church too, right? We see that these big mega churches, they're flashy, they're beautiful, but there are people that are not committed. I'm sure there are some. We shouldn't paint the whole thing with a broad brush, but the reality, I think, for the reality for most people, they're consuming something.
Sure.
And once that wears off, then they'll wear off.
Right. Yep.
One thing I think about with this stability chapters is people who are successful, or they save up a pretty healthy chunk during their work years, and they retire, and their dream in life is then they spend the rest of their life on a cruise ship, or 8 months a year on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
They're traveling, whatever. And like, I enjoy traveling. I understand why people would want to do that, but it just totally removes that person from their community. And now they have no community. Their community is a cruise ship. It's whoever it is. The stewardess on the airplane. That's not a real community. And like that, that is, to me, incredible evidence of the atomization of our society, that people would want to do that. It indicates to me that it's obviously wouldn't be true in every circumstance, but most of the people, and there's millions of people that do that every year, it shows that they don't actually have real community where they are. Like, they have failed to really make deep roots with any of the people they live near. And so they perceive no loss in, going and basically living like rich gypsies. Except gypsies themselves, they traveled in packs. They had a community.
Right. I think the rich gypsies are the one thing that's going to come out of this meeting that's going to stick in my head. But that's right. I think you're right. I was really one of my pastors in New York turned down a job, not because he didn't want to do it, because the group said, we don't think it's time for you to go. And think about how that kicks against our sort of American Western culture individualism, like, and he didn't at first wasn't totally like, I mean, and then he ultimately said, I think you're right. And he just submitted himself to this group. Think about how much that kicks against, like, what, you know.
You guys have probably already talked about this. I apologize because I've kind of blundered into a conversation that's been taking place before I was invited to show up. But again, there is this pressure, this contrast running through our culture between what we might call order or responsibility, and then freedom or adaptability or self-definition or whatever you want to call it. And like our culture has come down very hard on the side of maximum freedom. It's what Charles Taylor called liquid modernity, the ability to simply adapt and redefine yourself at any moment. And the idea of responsibility is, and submitting yourself to any kind of higher governing structure or authority is noxious on the whole. And Nate was talking about like the transient retirees. That liquid modernity, that becoming a rich gypsy, and it really is rich gypsy, it only works for that small subset of our economy of people who have the disposable wealth to do it. Because the breakdown of order actually ends up affecting those, and there are many of them, who do not have those resources, who cannot become rich gypsies. But the whole culture around them has been rich gypsified, and that has led to a breakdown of community, which is absolutely necessary for those who don't come out on the top of the economic pile to live and prosper. Like order, responsibility, these things are absolutely necessary for the great mass of people. But our culture caters to those who, can rich gypsificate themselves at one time or another.
Well, I'm kind of like Peter, and I'm kind of to the show a little late here, but it seems to me like that. One of the things that I hear being talked about is the desire to build deep, abiding friendships and accountability, and that takes time. And this hopping around and changing and moving on a moment's notice, so to speak, definitely flies in the face of building deep, abiding friendships over a period of time. Yeah. So I think that's what we hope that this group, or at least one of the things that this group is able to accomplish, is to build those kind of friendships. The people that are riding around on the cruise ships, ever so often that whole group of people changes. They don't, because they're some people get off and some people get on, and so their group of people that they're floating around on the cruise ship with is not always the same. Right. Same way with moving jobs, on a frequent basis, is if you don't stay somewhere long enough, it's really hard to build those kind of relationships.
Just think about like the anxiety and depression and suicide rates climbing ridiculously.
Right.
Right now, especially. And, even just within social media and the surface level relationships and the constant bouncing around and the constant trying to fill, what you can. I think that, lack of community and things like that is a precursor to a lot of it.
Or listening to people on social media talk about you that don't matter in your life, that have no bearing, that aren't with you, and I mean, myself, like personally, like when I read, there are places I talk about Peter because he's one of my dearest friends for 10 years, but I mean, we talk about scriptures that say faithful are the wounds of a friend. That's weird to say faithful are wounds faithful, wounds, friendship. How do those three words go together? But like, I long for people that know me well enough that I'm blind to my own folly all the time. That they can say, like, lovingly say, Ryan, you're about don't do this, or you see what you're doing, and I've talked to people in this room saying like I myself have never made any major decisions without talking to a group of people that love me, know me, and they're like, hey, like, how do you think this fits, or what do you? And I think it's something that we all long for, we all want, and that some of us maybe even think we have, but it hasn't gone to the depths that it can. You know, these beautiful places that I've myself have experienced and seen. Yeah. But Danny, you're right. I think that's the hope of this. Grow closer to God and one another, and I hope very meaningful ways. Anybody else? All right. Just look here. Yeah, chapter. I might start combine. Is a chapter a week attainable, or do you want to try and do 2?
About one's
Okay, let's just.
with what's packed into it.
Yeah, let's packed in. All right, you're right. All right, so we'll do that. Well, chapter 4 next week. A new kind of Christian politics, friends.
That should be interesting.
Yes. Yeah, it's gonna get fun.
2.5, 3 weeks.
Right. Yeah. Be fun.
Perfect timing.
Right. Hey Nate, will you finish? You pray with us, and then we will close with the Lord's Prayer, and we use the words debts. So.
I don't know. I'm a trespasses guy.
Well, hey. Come on.
Anyway, okay. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for creating such an incredible world that is so deep, that is so complex, subtle, and interesting, and tasty and colorful, and full of other people, and just is so magnificent. We praise you for your magnificence, and that we thank you that you created us to enjoy what you created, and giving our lives meaning and interest. And we thank you also that you've put each of us in this place right now with this people, each of these men, and for a specific reason that none of us know fully. Ask that you would reveal that to us, that we would be able to unpack your purpose for us and the way in which our community ought to interact. Give us guidance and give us wisdom in the way that we relate to each other, and that we may form a brotherhood with each other that lives to honor you and grows deep roots with each other. With that, let's pray the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father,
who art in heaven,
hallowed
hallowed
be
be thy name.
thy
Thy
kingdom
kingdom
come,
come, thy will be
Will
done
be
on
on
earth
earth
as
as
it
it
is
is
in
in
heaven.
heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread.
Bread,
Forgive us our
forgive us our
debts,
debts as we
as we
forgive our
forgive our
debtors.
debtors.
and lead us
Lead us
not
not
into
The
into
temptation,
temptation.
but
But
deliver
deliver
us
us
from
from
evil.
evil.
For thine is the
For the
kingdom,
kingdom
and the
and the
power,
power
and the glory,
forever.
forever. Amen.
Amen.
Much love, friends.
Bye, guys.
See ya.
Ah.
Peace.